My name is Mitchell Carter. My husband and his mother threw me out of our home with my 3 baby boys. I had nowhere to go, so I wandered the streets of Atlanta until I found shelter inside an abandoned mansion. I thought it would only protect us for one night. I had no idea that what I would discover inside that house would change my life forever. Before we continue, take a second to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy powerful stories like this, and drop your city in the comments so I know where everyone is watching from. Take those babies and get out of my house. The words hit me so hard I almost dropped the diaper bag at my feet. I stood in the middle of the living room on Maplewood Drive in South Atlanta, holding Lucas against my chest. Josiah and Isaiah slept inside the small bassinet beside the couch. The front door was wide open. Cold air moved through the house. My stomach still hurt every time I shifted my weight. 2 weeks earlier, I had given birth. 3 babies, 3 tiny lives. And now, my husband, Judge Carter, was looking at us like we didn't belong there. He leaned against the doorway. His arms were crossed over his chest. His face was calm, too calm, like he had already made up his mind. Behind him stood Celine Carter, watching the scene like she was waiting for a show to start. Her eyes moved from me to the bassinet, then back to Judge. "Judge, please," I said to him. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. "Where do you expect me to go with 3 newborns?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Celine stepped forward first. "That's not our concern," she said. Her voice was sharp and clean. Lucas began crying in my arms. I shifted him against my shoulder, gently rocking him. My body still felt weak. Every movement reminded me that I was still healing. Judge didn't even glance at the baby, not once. Instead, he looked at the bassinet near the couch. Then he said something that made the air in the room feel heavy. "Mitchell, are you sure those babies are mine?" For a moment, the room felt frozen. I stared at him. The hospital bracelet was still wrapped around my wrist. My body still carried the pain of labor, and now my husband was asking me that question? "Judge," I said slowly, "you were there at the hospital." Celine gave a short laugh. "3 babies at once," she said, folding her arms. She looked at the bassinet again. "That doesn't happen naturally." My chest tightened. Josiah stirred inside the bassinet. Isaiah moved beside him. 3 small blankets, 3 small faces. They looked so peaceful. Celine tilted her head slightly. "Look at them," she continued. "Do they even look like my son?" Her words sat in the room like something rotten. I didn't answer right away, because part of me still believed Judge would stop this, that he would look at his sons and remember they were his. But he didn't. Instead, he walked to the door and pulled it open even wider. Bright daylight filled the entrance. People were outside. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down stood near the sidewalk with her small dog. A delivery driver sat inside a truck parked on the street. They were watching. Nobody said anything, but their eyes moved from Judge to me to the babies. Celine noticed too. She straightened her shoulders. "Go ahead," she said to me. "You already embarrassed this family enough." I felt my throat tighten. "I have nowhere else to go," I said. "Please don't do this." The word hung in the air. For a moment, nobody spoke. Judge stood there with one hand on the door. His expression didn't change. Then he pointed toward the street. "Take them and leave." Lucas cried louder against my shoulder. Josiah and Isaiah started waking in the bassinet. 3 babies crying at the same time. The sound filled the house, and still, Judge did not move. I looked around the living room slowly, the couch where I spent my pregnancy resting, the small table where we once talked about baby names, the framed wedding photo hanging near the hallway. All of it still there, but suddenly, none of it felt like mine. Celine stepped closer to the bassinet. She looked down at the babies like they were something strange. Then she turned back toward Judge. "You're doing the right thing." Judge didn't answer. He just held the door open. The wind moved through the room again, and that was when I realized something felt wrong. Not just cruel, not just heartless, but planned, like this moment had been waiting for me. I tightened my hold on Lucas and looked at my husband one more time, because one question suddenly filled my mind. If Judge truly believed those babies weren't his, then why did he already look so certain about throwing us away? Mitchell, is it true? I stood on the sidewalk at the corner of Maplewood Drive and Glenwood Avenue, holding my phone against my ear while Lucas cried against my shoulder. Cars passed slowly on the street. A woman walking her dog slowed down when she saw me standing there with 3 babies. She stared for a moment, then she kept walking. Is what true? I asked. My voice felt dry. On the other end of the phone, my cousin Tanya stayed quiet for a second, long enough for my stomach to tighten. Then she said it. Judge said those babies aren't his. The words landed like something heavy inside my chest. I looked down at the bassinet beside me. Josiah and Isaiah were starting to wake up. Their small hands moved under their blankets. Who told you that? I asked. Tanya let out a slow breath. Everybody's talking about it, Mitchell. I didn't respond. Judge called Uncle Raymond this morning, Tanya continued. He said you cheated. He said you tried to trap him with babies that aren't his. I closed my eyes for a moment. Lucas cried louder against my shoulder. I rocked him gently. He knows that isn't true, I said, but even as I spoke, my voice sounded uncertain. Tanya didn't answer right away. Then she said something that felt even worse. Mitchell, you know how people see Judge. Of course I did. Judge Carter was the man everyone respected, the man who always sounded confident, the man who never looked like he was lying. And me? Right now, I was standing on a street corner in South Atlanta with 3 newborn babies in a diaper bag. No house, no car, no explanation anyone wanted to hear. Truth doesn't always look convincing. Can I stay with you for a few days? I asked. The words felt heavy leaving my mouth. Another long pause. I could hear voices behind Tanya on the phone, someone talking in the background. Then she spoke again. I wish I could help Mitchell. My chest tightened. But my landlord is strict about guests. I didn't answer, not because I believed her, because I understood what she was really saying. Helping me would mean taking responsibility for 3 babies, 3 crying mouths, 3 diapers, 3 lives, and most people didn't want that kind of weight in their house. I'm sorry, Tanya added quickly. Then the call ended. The phone screen went dark. I stood there for a moment. Cars moved through the intersection. I adjusted Lucas in my arms. Josiah started crying. Then Isaiah followed. 3 babies crying at the same time. The sound echoed across the street. People turned their heads. Some watched for a second. Then they walked away. A group of teenagers stood outside a convenience store on Flat Shoals Avenue. One of them looked toward me and said something to the others. They laughed. Not loudly, but loud enough. I didn't react. I just stood there, because explaining myself suddenly felt pointless. Judge had already told the story, and his version sounded cleaner, easier. A man betrayed by his wife, 3 babies that might not be his. People love stories like that, especially when the man telling them sounds calm and certain. I picked up the bassinet. My arms shook a little from the weight. Lucas was still crying against my shoulder. Josiah and Isaiah cried beside him. 3 voices, 3 small lives, all depending on me. I started walking slowly down Glenwood Avenue, not really sure where I was going. The sun sat high in the sky. The city moved around me like nothing had happened. Cars, buses, people heading to work, and me, just another woman pushing through the street with babies no one wanted to claim. After a few blocks, my phone vibrated again. Another call. For a second, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe someone had heard the truth. Maybe someone was calling to help. I looked at the screen. The name made my stomach drop. Judge Carter. I answered slowly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his voice came through the phone, calm, controlled. Mitchell, he said, you should stop calling people. I felt my chest tighten. Why? I asked. There was a short pause. Then he said something that made the street around me feel colder. Because the story is already out. My grip tightened on the phone. What story? Judge didn't raise his voice. He sounded almost relaxed. The truth, he said. Then he added one more sentence, and suddenly everything felt worse. Everyone already knows what you did. Ma'am, you can't stay here. The man behind the counter at the Edgewood Avenue laundromat looked at me with tired eyes. Lucas cried against my shoulder. Josiah and Isaiah were inside the bassinet on top of one of the folding tables. 3 babies, 3 small voices filling the room. The dryers hummed along the wall. A woman loading clothes into a washer kept glancing at me. Her eyes moved from my face to the babies, then back again. I shifted my weight slowly. "I'll leave soon," I said. My voice sounded weaker than I wanted. The man rubbed the back of his neck. "You said that 3 hours ago." He wasn't angry, just uncomfortable. I understood that look. People start with sympathy, but sympathy has a limit, especially when 3 babies are crying. "I just need a little more time," I said. He looked at the babies again, then at the diaper bags sitting on the floor. Then he shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, ma'am." That word again? Sorry. It follows you everywhere when you're struggling. Sorry, but I can't help. Sorry, but this isn't my problem. Sorry, but you need to leave. Lucas cried louder. Josiah started crying too. The woman by the washer closed the lid and stared for a second. Then she leaned toward another woman beside her. They spoke quietly, but I still caught the words. "That's the lady from Maplewood Drive." The other woman nodded. "The one Judge Carter kicked out." Then came the part that hurt the most. 3 babies at once? Something about that situation ain't right. I kept my eyes on the floor, not because I was ashamed, because explaining myself felt useless. The story had already been written. Judge told it first, and people believed the version that made more sense. A husband betrayed, a wife with something to hide. That story fits easier in people's minds. The laundromat owner walked around the counter. He stood beside the folding table, his voice lowered. "You need somewhere safe for those babies," he said. "I know." He hesitated, then pointed toward the door. "But it can't be here." I nodded slowly. My arms felt heavy as I lifted the bassinet. Josiah and Isaiah cried together now. Lucas still cried against my chest. 3 voices echoing through the small building. People watched as I walked toward the door. Nobody stopped me. Nobody offered anything. Outside, the sunlight hit my eyes as I stepped onto Edgewood Avenue. Cars moved past like nothing in the world had changed. I checked my phone again. No new calls, no messages. The last thing on the screen was still Judge's name. I slid the phone back into my pocket. My wallet felt thin in my hand. $18. That was all I had left. 3 babies and $18. I started walking again, past small stores, past people standing outside a barber shop on Auburn Avenue. One man looked at the bassinet as I passed. "Lord have mercy," he said quietly, not in kindness, more like disbelief. I kept moving, block after block. My legs felt weak. Every step pulled at the pain in my stomach. I had not fully recovered from childbirth, but there was no time to stop. The city slowly began to thin out as I moved farther from downtown Atlanta. Tall buildings turned into smaller houses, then fewer houses, then empty lots. The sidewalk cracked under my shoes. Weeds pushed through the concrete. Lucas had finally stopped crying. Josiah and Isaiah slept again inside the bassinet. Their tiny chests rose and fell slowly. For a moment, everything felt quiet. Then I noticed something ahead. At the end of a long dirt road near Franklin Ridge Road, a tall iron gate leaned sideways between 2 old brick pillars. Behind it stood a house. No, not a house, a mansion. Huge, silent. The windows were broken. Vines climbed across the walls. The yard looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Most people would have turned around right there. Places like that carry stories people avoid. But all I saw was space, a roof, 4 walls, somewhere my babies could rest. I pushed the iron gate slowly. It dragged across the dirt with a rough sound. The yard stretched wide in front of me. Tall grass moved in the wind. The mansion stood at the center like it had been forgotten by the entire world. For a moment, I just stood there, holding Lucas, looking at the house. Something about it felt strange, not scary, just waiting, like the place had been sitting empty for a long time, waiting for someone to walk through that gate. I took a slow step forward, then another, toward the front door, and that was when I noticed something odd. The front door wasn't fully closed. It was slightly open, like someone had left it that way, and suddenly, one question crossed my mind. If this place had been abandoned for years, then who opened the door? The front door moved slowly as I pushed it open. The wood scraped against the floor. Dust floated in the air as sunlight poured through the broken windows. I stood there for a moment at the entrance of the mansion on Franklin Ridge Road, holding Lucas close to my chest. Josiah and Isaiah slept inside the bassinet beside me. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stepped inside carefully. The floor creaked under my shoes. Every sound felt louder inside the huge space. A wide staircase curved along the wall. Old paintings hung crooked beside it. The frames were covered in dust. The place looked like it had been left behind years ago, but it was still standing, still strong. That alone made it feel safer than the sidewalk. Lucas moved slightly against my shoulder. I rocked him slowly while looking around. A large chandelier hung above the entrance hall. Half the bulbs were broken. Long spiderwebs stretched across the ceiling, but the house felt solid, not like something ready to fall apart. I walked deeper inside. My steps echoed through the hallway. The mansion opened into a huge living room. Tall windows faced a front yard. Sunlight filled the room, cutting through the dust in the air. Broken chairs sat near the wall. An old couch leaned sideways like someone had pushed it there long ago. But there was space, so much space. I set the bassinet down carefully on the wooden floor. Josiah moved first, then Isaiah. Both started crying again. Lucas joined them, 3 tiny voices bouncing off the walls. I knelt beside them slowly. My stomach pulled with pain when I bent down. 2 weeks after giving birth, my body still felt fragile, but there was no time to think about that. I lifted Josiah first, then Isaiah, holding both close for a moment. "It's okay," I said quietly. My voice echoed slightly in the large room. The baby slowly calmed down. I looked around again. The mansion felt strange, not dangerous, just forgotten, like the world had moved on and left this place behind. After a few minutes, I walked toward the windows facing the road. Through the glass, I could see Franklin Ridge Road stretching across the front of the property. A pickup truck passed in the distance. The driver never even glanced toward the mansion. That told me something. People here were used to ignoring this house, used to pretending it didn't exist. That meant one thing: no one would come looking for me here. I walked back into the living room. The couch near the wall caught my attention. The cushions were dusty, but the frame looked strong. I pushed it upright. Dust fell to the floor as it moved. Then I found an old blanket folded near the armrest. It smelled old, but it was clean enough. I spread it across the floor beside the couch. Josiah and Isaiah rested inside the bassinet. Lucas slept against my chest. My body felt heavy, not just from exhaustion, from everything that had happened. Judge throwing me out, the calls that never came back, people looking at me like I was the problem. For a moment, I just sat there on the wooden floor, 3 babies breathing softly beside me, sunlight stretching across the dusty room, and silence. Real silence, the kind that feels strange after so many days of noise. I leaned my back against the couch. My eyes closed for a second, then another. My body gave in before my mind could argue. For the first time since leaving Maplewood Drive in South Atlanta, I rested. Not comfortable, not safe, but at least not standing on the street. Time passed slowly inside that quiet house. When I finally opened my eyes again, the sunlight had shifted across the floor. Josiah stirred inside the bassinet. Isaiah followed. Lucas slept peacefully beside me. I sat up slowly. Something felt different. Not outside, inside the house. Like the place had its own history, like someone had once cared deeply about it. I stood and walked across the living room. More rooms opened down the hallway. A dining room, a large kitchen, tall cabinets covered in dust. Everything left exactly where it had been years ago. No signs of people living here, no fresh footprints, nothing, which made the next thing I noticed even stranger. Near the far wall of the living room stood a tall wooden bookshelf. Old books leaned in every direction, most covered in thick dust, but one section of the shelf looked different, cleaner, like something had been moved recently. I stepped closer slowly. My heart began beating faster, because abandoned houses usually stay exactly the same, but this shelf looked disturbed, and when I reached out and touched one of the books, the entire wooden panel behind it shifted slightly, just a small movement, but enough to reveal something hidden behind the wall, a narrow space, and inside that space, I could see the corner of a small wooden box. My hand froze in the air, because one thought suddenly crossed my mind. If this mansion had been empty for years, then who hid something inside that wall? Miss Carter, this is the third notice. The banker slid the paper across the counter. I stood inside a small branch office on Peachtree Street in Midtown Atlanta, holding Lucas on my hip, while Josiah and Isaiah slept in a double stroller beside me. People in line behind me kept glancing over. 3 babies always draw attention. The banker adjusted his glasses and tapped the paper. The balance on your credit account is now $12,000. I stared at the number, not because it was new, but because it still didn't feel real. That credit card was supposed to be temporary help. Judge used it months earlier to start his business opportunity. Equipment, office rent, marketing. He promised the company would take off quickly. He promised the debt would be paid once the money started coming in. Instead, he kicked me out, left me with 3 newborn boys and $12,000 in his name sitting on my credit card. The banker cleared his throat. This account was used for business funding, he said. Yes, I answered quietly. He glanced at the babies again, then back at the file. Well, the monthly payment is $480. $480. The number hit harder than the total balance because it wasn't just a bill, it was a reminder. Every month, I was paying for the dream of a man who abandoned us. I swallowed slowly. I can make the payment. The banker nodded and pushed another paper toward me. Good, but the next one is due in 30 days. 30 days. 30 days to find another $480 while raising 3 babies alone. I nodded once, then signed the form. No one asked how a woman with 3 newborn babies planned to do it. That part was not their concern. Outside the bank, the sun hit my face as I pushed the stroller down Peachtree Street. Cars moved slowly through traffic. People walked past carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Everyone looked busy. Everyone looked like they had somewhere to be. The next morning, I started at a diner on Peachtree Street, not far from the bank. The sign outside read Magnolia Breakfast House. The manager, a woman named Carol, looked at me carefully during the interview. You got experience cooking? She asked. Yes. You got childcare? I looked down at the stroller. Not yet. She stared for a second, then let out a slow breath. I can give you a morning shift, she said, 6 to 2. Relief moved through my chest. Thank you. But the babies can't stay in the kitchen, she added quickly. I understand. Every morning after that, I pushed the stroller from Franklin Ridge Road toward the bus stop near Memorial Drive. The ride into Midtown took almost 40 minutes. Some passengers stared at the stroller. Some smiled. Others avoided eye contact. At the diner, an older waitress named Denise watched the babies while I worked the grill. Eggs, pancakes, bacon. The smell followed me home every day. But the paycheck was small, too small. So when my shift ended, I took another job, cleaning houses in Buckhead. Large homes with tall gates and wide lawns, places that looked nothing like the abandoned mansion where I slept. The first house belonged to a couple on West Paces Ferry Road. The woman handed me cleaning supplies and pointed to the kitchen. Just wipe everything down, she said. Her eyes moved to the stroller near the door. You got 3? Yes. She shook her head slowly. Lord. Then she walked away. No more questions, no kindness either, just distance. I cleaned floors, scrubbed sinks, carried trash outside, all while watching the clock, because every hour meant a few more dollars, and every dollar meant survival. By the time the sun dropped lower in the sky, I pushed the stroller back toward the bus stop again. The ride back to Franklin Ridge Road always felt longer. My arms ached, my legs burned, but when I reached the mansion gate, something always changed. The place looked different now, still broken, still quiet, but less empty. Inside, the living room slowly began to look like a home. I cleaned dust from the floors, moved old furniture, opened windows to let the air move through the rooms. Little by little, the abandoned mansion started changing. Because of us, because 3 small boys were growing there, and I refused to let that place swallow us. One afternoon, after finishing a cleaning job in Buckhead, I stopped near a newsstand on Peachtree Road. A magazine cover caught my attention. A man stood on the front page, wearing a sharp suit, standing beside a brand new office building. His smile looked confident, proud. I knew that smile. My husband, Judge Carter. The headline under his photo read, "Atlanta's rising entrepreneur makes big moves in real estate." I stared at the picture for a long moment. The same man who threw his family out of a house was now building an empire. People walking past stopped to look at the magazine too. One man picked it up. "Smart guy," he said. "Started from nothing." I said nothing, just stood there with my 3 boys beside me, watching the world celebrate the man who destroyed mine. Then I noticed something else on the magazine page, a smaller headline under the article. It mentioned the name of the company Judge had just launched, and when I read that name, my stomach tightened, because I recognized it immediately. It was the same company he had started using my credit card. "Mom, look at that car." Josiah's voice came from the front yard. I stepped out onto the cracked porch of the mansion on Franklin Ridge Road and wiped my hands on my jeans. The afternoon sun set high over the trees. A long black car rolled slowly toward the rusted gate. It moved too smoothly for a road like this. Josiah, Isaiah, and Lucas stood near the tall grass at the edge of the yard. 14 years had passed since the day I walked through that gate with 3 newborn babies. Now those same boys were tall, strong, curious about everything. The car stopped just outside the property, a black Mercedes S-Class, shiny, clean, the kind of car people see in Buckhead, not near an abandoned road like Franklin Ridge. Lucas crossed his arms. "Who drives all the way out here?" he said. I felt something shift in my chest. The driver's door opened slowly. A man stepped out. Dark suit, polished shoes, gold watch catching the sunlight. For a second, the world felt quiet. Because I knew that walk. I knew that posture, even after all those years. Judge Carter, my husband, the father who had never come looking. Josiah looked at me. "Mom, do you know him?" I didn't answer right away. Judge adjusted his jacket and looked toward the mansion like he was studying it. Then his eyes landed on the boys. He smiled, that same confident smile I remembered from Maplewood Drive in South Atlanta, the smile that made people trust him. He walked through the open gate like he owned the road. Lucas stepped slightly in front of his brothers. "Can we help you?" Lucas asked. Judge stopped a few feet away. He looked at each of them carefully. His eyes moved across their faces, studying, measuring. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "I've been looking for you boys." Josiah frowned. "Looking for us?" Judge nodded slowly. "Yes." He placed his hands in his pockets like this was a normal conversation. "I'm your father." Silence filled the yard. Isaiah looked at me immediately. Lucas did the same. 3 pairs of eyes waiting for me to say something, but Judge spoke first. "I know this must be confusing," he said. His voice sounded calm, controlled, like he had practiced these words. "I tried to find you years ago." My hands tightened at my sides. Tried? The word felt wrong, but the boys were already listening. Josiah stepped closer. "You're our dad?" Judge gave a small nod. "Yes." He looked toward the mansion behind us. "I didn't know your mother brought you all the way out here." His eyes moved across the old walls and broken windows. He shook his head slowly. "Boys like you shouldn't be living in a place like this." Lucas turned toward the house. "This is our home," he said. Judge smiled again. Not mocking, just calm, like a man explaining something simple. Not the kind of home you deserve. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone. The screen lit up as he tapped it. Then he turned it toward them. Photos appeared. Tall buildings, office spaces, luxury apartments. "My company owns several properties in downtown Atlanta," he said. Josiah leaned forward slightly. "You built all that?" Judge nodded. "Yes." Isaiah looked impressed. Lucas looked uncertain. I watched the whole moment from the porch, every word, every look. Judge stepped closer to them. "You boys are smart," he said. "You deserve better schools, better opportunities." Josiah's eyes brightened. "What kind of opportunities?" Judge glanced at me briefly, then back at them. "Private schools," he said. "Travel, college abroad." The boys exchanged quick looks. I could see the excitement already growing. Judge let the silence stretch for a moment. Then he said the line that changed everything. "I've been trying to bring you back into my life." My chest tightened. The word felt wrong again. Lucas finally looked back at me. "Mom, why didn't you tell us about him?" I opened my mouth, but Judge spoke first, his voice still calm, still confident. "Because the story you've been told isn't the whole truth." The boys looked between us, confused now, curious. Judge straightened his jacket, then he added one more sentence, and suddenly the ground under my feet didn't feel steady anymore. "You should ask your mother why she took you away from me." "Open it." Judge placed the box on the old wooden table inside the living room of the mansion on Franklin Ridge Road. Josiah looked at me first, then at the box. Lucas and Isaiah leaned closer. The afternoon sun came through the tall windows, lighting the dust in the air. The house looked the same as it always had. Old walls, cracked floors, broken furniture pushed to the side. But suddenly, something felt different. Judge Carter stood in the middle of the room, like he belonged there, like the place was temporary, like the boys standing around him were already leaving. Josiah slowly lifted the lid of the box. Inside were 3 brand new phones, still in their packaging. Lucas picked one up. "For us?" he asked. Judge nodded. "Of course." Isaiah held the second box carefully. "These are expensive," he said. Judge smiled slightly. "You're my sons." The word hung in the air. The boys looked at each other. Something inside them shifted. Excitement, curiosity, maybe even pride. Judge watched their reactions closely, like a man who understood exactly what he was doing. Lucas turned the phone over in his hands. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he asked. Lucas leaned back against the table. His face showed something close to sadness, or at least a good version of it. "I tried," he said. His eyes moved toward me. "But things were complicated." I stepped forward. "That's not true." My voice sounded stronger than I expected. Judge looked at me calmly, then back at the boys. "You see," he said, "this is why it's been difficult." Josiah frowned. "What do you mean?" Judge took a slow breath, like a man deciding how much to say. "For 14 years, he said, I tried to find you." Isaiah looked surprised. "You did?" Judge nodded. "Yes." His eyes moved across the room. "Your mother took you away before I even had the chance to be your father." My chest tightened. "That's a lie." Judge didn't react. He stayed calm, relaxed, like someone who knew he was winning. Lucas looked at me. "Mom, he says he looked for us." I felt 3 sets of eyes waiting for my answer. I opened my mouth, but Judge spoke again. "Ask yourself something," he said to them. "Why would a father with resources, with money, stay away from his sons for 14 years? Josiah looked confused. Lucas lowered the phone slowly. Isaiah stared at the floor. Judge let the silence stretch. Then he said the next line carefully. "Unless someone made it impossible." I felt the ground shift under my feet, because I knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't accusing, he was planting doubt, small seeds. Lucas looked at me again. "Mom, did you stop him from seeing us?" My throat felt tight. "No, baby, he's lying." The word came out quickly, but Judge sighed softly, not loudly, just enough for the boys to hear. I didn't want to tell you this today, he said. His voice sounded heavy, but the truth matters. My hands clenched. Josiah stepped closer to him. What truth? Judge looked at the mansion walls again, then at the broken windows. You boys grew up here, he gestured toward the room, in this place. Lucas crossed his arms. There's nothing wrong with this house. Judge gave a small nod. No. Then he looked directly at them. But you could have grown up in something better. Josiah's expression changed. What do you mean? Judge pulled out his phone again. He tapped the screen. Photos appeared. Large houses, bright classrooms, students wearing uniforms, private schools in downtown Atlanta. This is the life you were supposed to have, he said. Isaiah stared at the screen. You could have sent us there? Sure, I got the money. Lucas looked at me again. Mom, why didn't we go to schools like that? The question hit harder than anything Judge had said, because it came from my son. I took a step forward. Boys, listen to me. But Judge spoke again before I could finish. I asked your mother many times, he said calmly. I asked her to let me help. I stared at him. That never happened. But the boys were already looking uncertain. Judge didn't argue. He simply shrugged slightly. Maybe she remembers things differently. Josiah rubbed the back of his neck. The room felt quiet again. Then Lucas said something that made my chest hurt. Why would Mom keep us away from all that? Judge looked straight at me, then back at them. His voice stayed calm, measured, like a man giving them the answer they were already expecting. Sometimes, he said slowly, people make choices out of pride. The words landed hard. Josiah looked at the floor. Isaiah said nothing. Lucas stared at the phone in his hand. 3 boys, standing between 2 versions of the same story. Judge pushed himself away from the table. Then he added one more line, and this time the damage was clear. If you want the truth, he said quietly, you should ask your mother why she chose this life for you. You should come see it. Judge stood beside the black Mercedes S-Class parked just outside the gate on Franklin Ridge Road. Josiah, Isaiah, and Lucas stood near him. The tall grass moved slowly in the wind. I stayed on the porch of the mansion, watching, waiting. Lucas looked back at me. What does he want to show us? Judge lifted his car keys slightly. There's a school I want you boys to see, he said. He opened the car door. You ever heard of Westminster Schools in Buckhead? Isaiah's eyes widened. That's one of the best schools in Atlanta. Judge nodded. Yes. Lucas looked toward the mansion behind him, then toward the car again. You could send us there, right? Judge leaned casually against the car. I could send you anywhere. His voice sounded relaxed, confident, like money solved everything. Josiah turned to me. Mom, can we go see it? The question felt heavier than it should have, because I already saw where this was heading. It's far from here, I said slowly. Judge answered before the boys could. That's the point. Lucas folded his arms. You never told us about schools like that. I held my breath for a second. Because we couldn't afford them. Judge gave a small laugh. Or maybe, he said calmly, she didn't want you to know they existed. Lucas looked back at me again. Is that true? My chest tightened. No, baby. Judge straightened up. You boys deserve the full picture. He opened the back door of the car. You deserve choices. Josiah stepped closer to the vehicle. The inside looked clean. Leather seats, a screen glowing on the dashboard. Nothing like the old pickup trucks that passed along Franklin Ridge Road. Isaiah followed him. Lucas stayed where he was, still watching me. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then Judge spoke again. I'm heading to Peachtree Road in Buckhead anyway, he said. There's a private academy hosting an open day. Josiah turned quickly. You mean we could actually see it? Judge nodded. Today. Excitement moved across their faces. The same boys who once played basketball on the cracked driveway of this mansion. The same boys who studied by the window when the lights inside flickered. Now they were staring at a future they had never imagined. Lucas looked back at me one last time. Mom, it's just a visit. I knew that tone. hope mixed with curiosity, the kind that doesn't listen to warnings. I wanted to stop them, to explain everything, but the words felt stuck inside my chest, because every time I tried to speak, Judge stood there smiling calmly, like a man who already knew the outcome. Josiah climbed into the back seat. Isaiah followed. Lucas hesitated for a second. Then he opened the door and sat down beside them. Judge walked around to the driver's side. Before getting in, he looked toward me. Our eyes met for a moment. His expression stayed calm, but something inside it felt like victory. He closed the door. The engine started quietly. The car rolled slowly back through the gate. Lucas leaned slightly toward the open window. His voice reached me just before the car turned toward the road. "Mom, if what he's saying is true." He paused, then finished the sentence. "Why didn't you give us that chance?" The Mercedes turned onto the road leading toward Memorial Drive. Dust lifted behind the tires. I stood there watching until the car disappeared. The yard felt empty. The porch felt too quiet. Inside the old mansion, 3 bedroom doors stayed open, 3 beds still made, 3 rooms waiting, but no voices, no laughter, just silence. I walked slowly through the living room, the same place where Judge had stood earlier that day, the same place where my sons began looking at me differently. The house felt larger now, like the walls had stretched overnight. I moved down the hallway toward the back of the mansion, past the kitchen, past the staircase, until I reached the old library. Sunlight entered through a tall, cracked window. Dust covered every shelf. Rows of old books leaned against each other. I had cleaned this room many times over the years, but something about it felt different that afternoon. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the weight of the day. I stepped closer to one of the large wooden shelves. My hand brushed across the edge of the frame, and the wood shifted slightly, just enough to catch my attention. I pushed again. The shelf moved. A narrow opening appeared in the wall behind it. Inside that space sat something small, a wooden box, old, covered in dust, waiting. My hand hovered over it for a moment, because something about it felt important, like this house had been hiding a story long before I arrived. I finally lifted the box slowly, and that was when I noticed something strange. There was a name carved on the top, a name I had never seen before, Robert Franklin. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. Dust fell from the paper onto the old wooden floor of the library. The sunlight through the tall window cut across the room. The mansion felt quiet again. Too quiet. I sat down slowly on the floor beside the shelf. The name carved on the box stayed in my mind. Robert Franklin, the man who once owned this place on Franklin Ridge Road. I took a deep breath and began reading. Dear friend, if you are reading this, it means you cared enough to keep this house alive. I paused. My heart started beating faster. I had never heard of Robert Franklin before, but whoever he was, he knew someone would find this box one day. I kept reading. My children left this house years ago. They wanted money, not memories. They wanted my land, not my life. The words felt heavy, like the pain inside them had waited years to be heard. But I believed someone else would come one day, someone who needed shelter, someone who would care for this place. I swallowed hard, because that was exactly what happened. I didn't come here looking for treasure. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. The letter continued. If that person is you, then you deserve what I prepared. My eyes moved to the next pages inside the box. Several folded documents, thick papers, official stamps. My fingers trembled as I opened the first one. Property deeds, land ownership forms. The name Robert Franklin appeared everywhere, but next to it was another line, a space left blank, like the papers were waiting for a name. My name, Mitchell Carter. I stared at it for a long time. The next document showed a map, several properties marked across Atlanta, buildings near Edgewood Avenue, a small office building close to Auburn Avenue, and land just outside Decatur, 15 acres. My mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. I flipped to another page, a legal note written years ago. If the mansion is maintained and protected by a resident for more than 10 years, all listed assets shall transfer to that resident under the care of the Franklin Trust. 10 years? I counted slowly in my head. I had lived here 14. 14 years of broken windows, 14 years of cleaning dust, 14 years raising 3 boys inside these walls. I leaned back against the shelf. The room suddenly felt smaller. Or maybe my world had just become too big, because if these papers were real, everything was about to change. But I needed proof. I gathered the documents carefully and placed them back inside the box. Then, the next day, I left the mansion. The drive toward downtown Atlanta felt strange. My hands gripped the steering wheel of the old used car I bought years ago. Traffic moved slowly along Memorial Drive. People walked along the sidewalks like any normal afternoon, but inside my chest, nothing felt normal. I parked near a tall brick building on Peachtree Street, a law office. The name outside read, Dorsey Legal Group. My legs felt weak walking inside. A receptionist looked up from the desk. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak to a lawyer," I said quietly. She studied the dusty box in my hands. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." She hesitated, then pointed toward a hallway. "Mr. Dorsey might be available." Minutes later, I sat across from a gray-haired man in a quiet office. He opened the box slowly, looked at the letter, then the deeds, then the maps. His eyes moved carefully across every page. The room stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. He removed his glasses and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Carter," his voice sounded different now, more serious. "Do you understand what you may be holding here?" I shook my head slowly. He placed one of the property maps on the desk between us, then tapped it gently with his finger. "This trust includes multiple commercial buildings in downtown Atlanta." He paused, then added something that made my entire body freeze. "And based on current market value," he took a breath, "this estate could be worth over $20 million. The room spun slightly. 20 million? Just yesterday I stood on a porch of a broken mansion watching my sons drive away with a man who said I had nothing. And now, a lawyer was telling us something that didn't seem real. $20 million. My voice came out low, almost like I didn't believe my own ears. Mr. Dorsey sat across from me inside his office on Peachtree Street. The papers were spread across the desk. Maps, deeds, the letter from Robert Franklin. Everything felt unreal. Mr. Dorsey leaned forward. "The Franklin Trust includes the mansion, several commercial buildings near Edgewood Avenue, and land outside Decatur." He tapped one of the papers again. "Even if we remove a few disputed properties, the estate value still sits around $20 million. I repeated the number in my head again. Years ago, I struggled to pay $480 every month because of a debt judge left on my credit card. Now, I was hearing a number that could erase every struggle I ever knew. But something inside me stayed calm, because the first thought in my mind wasn't money, it was my sons. Josiah, Isaiah, and Lucas. They had just left with the man who destroyed our life, and they believed his lies. Mr. Dorsey cleared his throat. "There's still a legal process we must follow," he said. "The trust rules say the mansion had to be maintained by a resident for at least 10 years. I nodded slowly. "I lived there 14. "Yes," he said, "and that works in your favor." He gathered the documents into a neat stack. "But we must officially register your claim through the Franklin Trust office near downtown Atlanta." I exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, something good had finally entered my life. But I didn't rush. I didn't celebrate. I simply told him one thing. I'm not leaving that house. Mr. Dorsey gave a small smile. "You don't have to." So I stayed. The old mansion on Franklin Ridge Road slowly changed. The broken windows got replaced. The leaking roof was repaired. I planted flowers in the front yard. Neighbors who once avoided the place started walking past again. Some even stopped to talk. The house no longer looked abandoned. It looked alive. I turned the old library into my favorite room, the same place where I found Robert Franklin's letter. Every time I walked in there, I remembered the day my sons drove away. The silence still lived in those walls, but life continued. Months passed, then a year. Peace slowly returned. I didn't chase luxury. I didn't move to Buckhead or Midtown. I stayed exactly where I started, on Franklin Ridge Road, because that house held every memory of the fight that made me who I am. But the world outside Atlanta kept moving, and Judge Carter kept rising. His name started appearing everywhere: real estate deals, tech companies, luxury developments near Buckhead. News articles called him one of the fastest rising businessmen in Georgia. Photos showed him smiling in expensive suits, standing beside investors, driving cars that cost more than the mansion once did. And every time I saw those headlines, I remembered the day he threw me out with 3 newborn babies. But I didn't chase revenge. I focused on rebuilding my life. Until one afternoon, everything changed again. I was sitting inside the mansion kitchen. The radio on the counter played quietly. Sunlight came through the window facing the road. Then the news announcers said something that made me freeze. Breaking business news in Atlanta. I turned the volume higher. The Carter Development Group is now under federal investigation following allegations of financial misconduct connected to several downtown property investments. My heart started beating faster. The announcer continued, "Sources say the investigation involves millions of dollars and could impact several high-profile investors connected to the company. Judge Carter, the man who built an empire while I struggled to survive. Now his name was being investigated." I stood there in the kitchen for a long moment, processing the words, because sometimes life has a strange way of balancing things. But this story wasn't finished, not even close. The next morning, a black luxury car stopped outside the gate on Franklin Ridge Road. I stepped onto the porch slowly, the same long driveway, the same iron gate. But this time, the man stepping out of the car wasn't Judge. It was one of my sons, Lucas, and the look on his face told me something was terribly wrong. "Mom, we made a mistake." Lucas stood at the bottom of the porch steps on Franklin Ridge Road. The black car behind him stayed running. Dust from the driveway floated in the warm afternoon air. I looked at him carefully. Years ago, I held him in my arms as a newborn. Now he stood there taller than me. His shoulders were tense. His eyes looked tired. "What happened?" I asked. Lucas glanced back at the car. Josiah and Isaiah slowly stepped out. All 3 of them looked different now. Better clothes, expensive watches, but something inside their faces looked broken. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. "Dad lied to us." The word dad still sounded strange coming from him. I folded my arms quietly. "I know." Josiah stepped forward. "He told us you kept us away from him." Isaiah shook his head. "He said you hated him." My chest tightened. "And now?" Lucas looked straight at me. "We know the truth." I waited, because part of me still felt the pain from the day they left. Josiah spoke again. "The FBI came to his office in downtown Atlanta." I blinked slowly. "What?" Isaiah nodded. "They took files, computers, everything." Lucas kicked a small rock near the driveway. "His partners disappeared." Josiah added quietly, and investors started asking questions. I leaned against the porch rail. "So the empire isn't doing so well anymore." Lucas gave a bitter laugh. "That empire was built on lies." For a moment, nobody spoke. The wind moved through the tall trees near the mansion yard. Cars passed slowly on the road toward Memorial Drive. Life outside kept moving like nothing had happened. Lucas looked back toward the gate. "Mom, we should have listened to you." Those words hit harder than anything else, but I didn't rush to forgive them. Pain doesn't disappear that fast. "What do you want now?" I asked. Josiah answered, "We came home." The word home echoed inside my chest, but before I could respond, Lucas's phone rang. He checked the screen quickly. His face changed. "What is it?" Isaiah asked. Lucas looked up slowly. "It's about him." "About Judge?" Josiah asked. Lucas nodded. "He's in serious trouble." I stepped down from the porch. "What kind of trouble?" Lucas put the phone back in his pocket. "The investigation turned into criminal charges. Fraud, money laundering, hidden accounts. The same news stories that played quietly on radios across Atlanta were now becoming real." Josiah ran a hand through his hair. "Banks froze everything." Isaiah added, "His properties in Buckhead and Midtown are being seized." Lucas looked toward the mansion behind me. "All that money he used to impress us?" He shook his head slowly. "It's gone." I didn't feel joy hearing that, only something quieter, something colder. Maybe justice, Days asked.
News trucks parked outside buildings near downtown Atlanta. Judge Carter's name appeared on television every morning. The man once called one of the city's fastest rising businessmen was now the center of a federal fraud case. Former partners refused to speak about him. Investors claimed they never trusted him. The same people who once praised him now walked away. But the story didn't end there. One afternoon, I drove through the city. Traffic crawled along Peachtree Street. Construction workers moved between buildings. Office workers filled the sidewalks. Life in Atlanta never slows down. I stopped at a red light near 5 Points. That was when I saw him, a man sitting on the sidewalk, back against a concrete wall. His suit jacket looked old. His beard had grown uneven. In his hands, a piece of cardboard. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see the words written on it. Need help. The man slowly looked up. Our eyes met, and the world around me seemed to freeze, because the man sitting on that sidewalk was Judge Carter, the same man who once threw me out of a house with 3 newborn babies, the same man who built an empire across Atlanta, now sitting alone, broken, holding a cardboard sign.
Nobody recognized the man who once filled headlines across Atlanta. I watched him for a few seconds longer. His clothes were wrinkled. His shoes looked worn. The expensive suits were gone. The confident smile that once fooled investors, gone too. For a moment, I almost stepped out of the car. Almost. But then the memory came rushing back. Maplewood Drive, 3 newborn babies crying in my arms, his voice telling me to leave, his words calling me worthless. My chest tightened. The car behind me honked. The sound pulled me back to the moment. I pressed the gas gently. The BMW rolled forward through the intersection. Judge Carter became smaller in the rearview mirror, then disappeared behind traffic. But my hands kept shaking, because life had done something strange. It had turned the world upside down. The man who once controlled my future now depended on strangers walking past him. I drove toward Memorial Drive without thinking. The streets looked the same as always. Corner stores, bus stops, people moving through their day. But inside my mind, old memories were opening again. 14 years of struggle, cleaning houses in Buckhead, cooking in a diner on Peachtree Street, cutting grass for people who barely looked at me, all while raising 3 boys inside an abandoned mansion on Franklin Ridge Road. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Part of me wanted to feel anger. Another part expected joy, but neither feeling came. Instead, there was something else. Silence. By the time I reached the mansion gate, the sun set high above the trees. The iron gate creaked open like it always did. The house looked different now. Clean walls, fresh paint, flowers growing near the porch. Nobody would ever guess how broken it once was. I stepped out of the car slowly. The wind moved softly through the yard. Everything felt peaceful again. Too peaceful.
Mom, please say something. Lucas stood a few steps away from me in the driveway on Franklin Ridge Road. Josiah and Isaiah waited beside him. 3 grown men. 3 faces that still carried the boys I raised. The afternoon sun warmed the front of the mansion. Birds moved through the trees near the fence, but the air between us felt heavy, because everyone was waiting for my answer. I looked at them slowly, Lucas first, then Josiah, then Isaiah. 14 years ago, I watched them drive away toward Memorial Drive with Judge Carter. That day, I felt like my heart had been ripped out. Now, they were standing here again, asking to come home. Lucas spoke again. "We know we hurt you." Josiah nodded. "We believed lies," Isaiah added quietly, "and we left you alone." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned my head toward the mansion behind me. The house stood tall, fresh paint, new windows, a clean porch, nothing like the broken place I first walked into years ago. Back then, the door barely closed, the roof leaked, dust covered every room, but it still protected me. It protected my babies, and it helped me survive when nobody else would. I slowly turned back to my sons. "You want to come home now?" Lucas answered immediately, "Yes." Josiah looked around the yard again. "We miss this place." Isaiah nodded. "We miss you." The honesty in his voice felt real, but pain doesn't forget so easily. "Where were you when I needed help?" I asked quietly. The question landed like a stone. Lucas lowered his eyes. Josiah rubbed his hands together. Isaiah didn't speak. I continued. "When debt collectors called my phone every week?" Silence. "When I worked 2 jobs on Peachtree Street just to keep food in the house?" Josiah swallowed hard. "When the roof leaked during storms and I fixed it myself?" Lucas whispered. "We didn't know." I looked directly at him. "You didn't ask." The truth hung in the air. No anger, just honesty.
Cars passed slowly outside the gate. Someone walking along Memorial Drive laughed loudly with a friend. Normal life continued beyond the fence. That inside this yard, everything felt paused. Lucas finally lifted his head. "We can't change what happened." Josiah nodded. "But we can change what happens now." Isaiah stepped forward. "We want to rebuild our family." Family? The word echoed quietly inside my chest, because family had once meant everything to me, and losing it almost destroyed me. I walked slowly across the gravel toward them. Each step felt heavy. Lucas watched my face carefully, like he was trying to read my decision before I spoke. Josiah looked nervous. Isaiah looked hopeful. I stopped a few feet away. The mansion door stood open behind me, the same door that protected them when they were babies, the same door they walked away from years ago. Lucas finally asked again, "Mom, can we come back?" For a moment, I almost said yes. Almost, because a mother's heart always remembers love. But life had taught me something important. Forgiveness is not the same as trust, and trust takes time. I took a slow breath. Then I answered, "You can visit." Lucas blinked. Josiah looked confused. Isaiah tilted his head slightly. "Visit?" Lucas repeated. "Yes," I said calmly. "This house will always be part of your story." I pointed toward the mansion. "But coming back, living here again," I paused for a moment, "that takes time." None of them argued. They understood, because some wounds need space before they heal. Lucas nodded slowly. "That's fair." Josiah added quietly, "We'll earn it." Isaiah looked toward the house again. "We're not giving up." For the first time that day, I felt something small inside my chest. Hope. If you stayed with me until the end of my story, thank you. Life took almost everything from me. My home, my marriage, even the trust of my own sons. There were days in that old mansion when I truly believed my life was over. But sometimes, the place where you feel most lost becomes the place where you rebuild yourself. So now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been abandoned by someone you trusted? And if they came back years later asking for forgiveness, would you open the door? Tell me in the comments. And if my story meant something to you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.